to start this session with a few opening comments from each of our panelists, and I'm going to turn to you first, Mark. Can you tell us all a little bit more about the Places for Growth programme and your role as lead?
Amrita, I can try. Very good morning to you. We're clearly not as sexy as the digital AI stuff, so thank you for staying, or thank you for coming in if you've just joined. As Government Chief Property Officer, my desire was that this was called the 3 most important things around property. And for those of you that are old enough, then of course that's location, location, location. But we've gone from 3 to 2 because it's only called relocation, relocation, and it's not location, location, location. But we'll maybe come back to that. So, creating and moving roles out of London, investing in the regions. That's what Places for Growth is all about. And I've only got a very few minutes. So what I was going to do was I was going to talk about the benefits. So why are we doing it? I was going to talk about the progress, a little bit about real estate, because I can't be up here and not talk about property. And lastly, about community. But I'll leave that more to Beth and to Corinne to talk about. So let's talk about the benefits. PFG, why are we doing it? So first, and there are lots of reasons for doing it, the first is that it allows the civil service to be more representative of the UK citizen. So I don't know whether we can do a straw poll. How many of the audience live outside the M25? Fantastic, fantastic. You're all obviously, you don't need to be here. You're already sold. You're already bought in. So it allows civil service to be more representative. It's clearly more efficient in real estate because property, real estate in Darlington or in Glasgow is cheaper than London. We're driving economic growth into the areas where we're investing. So taking jobs, taking real estate investment into those. And lastly, and most importantly, we're fostering much stronger links with the local authorities in those locations. So rather than it all being about Whitehall and then about a local authority, we've got an extension of the civil service in these places, and that's helping us have more meaningful conversations with local authorities. So in terms of the stats, 22,000 jobs out of London by 2030. We were doing so well that actually that target's been brought forward to 2027. So it's now 22,000 out of London by 27. And I guess at the moment we're at 16,000 jobs. So we're already 2/3 of the way there. And if you watch the press this week, that number might go up a notch, and I can't tell you about how much it's going to go up, but if you watch the press this week, it's going to go up. So absolutely terrific that we've got that investment going out. What is more difficult is the second target, which is about 50% of SCS jobs, senior civil service jobs, being out of London by 2030. At the moment, we're at about 30%. And that's a harder nut to crack. So lots of focus across the system, both in Whitehall, in the departments, in the Cabinet Office, in Places for Growth, about what we can do to try and transform the location of the civil service. Coming back to property, real estate investment in new places. So Beth's going to come on and talk about Darlington. We've invested from a real estate perspective in Darlington. So I've already mentioned that it's cheaper, but what we're doing is we're creating civil service vibrant hubs in places that didn't exist before. And that's good for the locality, it's good for the civil service, it's driving cooperation in a way. And actually those hubs in Birmingham, in Peterborough, are winning national and international awards for great places to work. And that's as it should be, isn't it? We should have great places to work. And lastly, and I'm going to be really brief because others will talk about it far more eloquently, but the sense of creating communities for civil servants, cross-department communities in places, which is allowing cross-curricular work to be done on the civil service agenda, on the department agendas, but using the expertise of others. And that's massive, and lots of examples of those social communities, but also professional communities to be formed and to develop. So maybe I'm wrong where I started in saying the proper title should have been location, location, location. Maybe it's actually right that, and I'm going to change the rules again, let's call it location, relocation, location. So there is an opportunity to invest in place, create locations stronger than they were before with what we're trying to do under Places for Growth.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Mark. I think for those of you who were here yesterday, so much of the conversation was about the importance of people being able to work across departments and across silos, and what you're talking about there around community is so important to that. And you also laid a little trail for Beth, who's going to tell us a bit more about her role as the sponsor for Places for Growth, but particularly about the Darlington Economic Campus.
Thanks very much, and hi everyone. It's really nice to be here and see you all. So yeah, I'm going to say a few words about what we've been doing at the Darlington Economic Campus, which is a new cross-department hub based up in the northeast. So there have always been, for a long time, Department for Education civil servants based in Darlington, but a lot of those roles were sort of corporate support roles, supporting teachers' pension scheme and so on. And it was announced about 3 years ago that 8 more government departments are now going to be based in the town, led by the Treasury, which, as many of you know, the Treasury has been around for a very long time, but almost entirely around in London, unlike a lot of other departments, very London-centric. So we now have 800 new civil service roles already based at the campus in Darlington, and the ambition is to get, with the Department for Education, folk who are already there, to about 2,000 jobs, civil service jobs in the town over the next few years. I'd say 3 things I think that are a bit different about what we're trying to do in Darlington. So first is, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the civil service jobs based outside of London traditionally have been not what we would call policy roles, not roles working directly for ministers. A lot of the roles now based in Darlington, including in the Treasury, but in other government departments too, are doing precisely those kind of jobs which traditionally, you really had to move to London to do, which is really fantastic. And pretty much all the departments based there now have a philosophy that any job in the department can be done from Darlington or other places around the country, not just in London. Secondly, I think it's the sort of seniority of jobs we have now based in Darlington. So I'm now second permanent secretary. We have 2 director generals. I think we have something like 9 directors, 47 members of the senior civil service based in Darlington, and showing that you can have a career right to the most senior levels of the civil service and not have to move to London, I think is just, well, it's what we should be doing, and it's a very powerful kind of signal. And then thirdly, I think, just building on what Mark said, the word campus for us is not just a word, it's like a total philosophy of how we want to operate in Darlington. We all are based together in one building. We don't have separate floors for separate departments. We all mix up together. We have a joint leadership team that is for the campus as a whole across the departments. We do lots of our L&D development, social activity and so on as a campus, not department by department. I mean, the title of this was sort of how moving civil service jobs out of London and the South East can drive regional rebalancing. I mean, I don't think this alone is sort of the answer to levelling up, far from it, but I do think it's really important, I guess I would say, in 4 different ways. First is we're just creating new jobs in communities where previously people couldn't do these kind of civil service roles, giving the opportunities for people to, be writing advice directly for the Chancellor of the Exchequer, kind of based from Darlington. The majority of the people that we have recruited never worked in the civil service before, all sorts of different previous backgrounds, private sector, charity, other bits of the public sector, but most of them never would have even considered working in the civil service before. Secondly, I mean, those people and those of us who have relocated now have a different sort of life experience that feeds into the work that we do and the thinking that we do for ministers and for citizens. You know, I think obviously our policy advice is based on analysis and evidence, but it's also based on our own personal experiences. You know, I'm now, to give a slightly silly example, but, you know, in London, we didn't have a car, and, you know, you're very used to using public transport that's available, and you get cross if a bus doesn't arrive in 3 minutes. I now live in a village, I drive to work, the bus to work, I could get it, but it goes every 2 hours, and if it, you know, doesn't turn up, you're a bit buggered. So, you know, you have a different view on some of the issues than you would have if you were based in London. Thirdly, we have the chance, Mark talked about it, to forge, I think, really richer and different relationships with different types of stakeholders, local authorities, different types of businesses. And I think the biggest change for me personally has been we are part of a community in this place. Working in Whitehall is brilliant, you know, it's history and it's all there, but you're not part of a community at all there, whereas we are a big employer in this town. We do lots with local schools, local charities, and that sense of place and being part of seeing how the community will develop and our part in that is really powerful. And then finally, I alluded to it, but I think, you know, related back to the innovation theme of this conference, we've had the opportunity to innovate and be creative. Brilliant leadership team who right from the start wanted together to say we're going to try and do some things differently. Let's try and break down the silos between departments. Let's try and use the fact that we are co-located together to think about policy issues differently, to have different sorts of conversations. And we're at the early stages of that, but it's, I think, something really exciting that we want to build on in the period ahead.
No, thank you. Thank you, Beth. I think there is also something really interesting about that sense of building community to create belonging as well. And particularly, you know, speaking as my own experience as a civil servant, sometimes when you hear the way that we are talked about in the press, feeling proud of the community that you've got and the sense of belonging actually can go a long way to increase morale and trust in the work that we're doing. I'm now going to go to Dean for the private sector perspective. And Mark will be happy because I believe you're going to be talking about property as part of this as well.
Yes, it is somewhat inevitable that as property consultants we would have a bit of a real estate bias, but I'm going to try not to do too much on that, to be fair, Mark. So let's see how we go. I mean, I think the Places for Growth initiative policy has suggested that there's about £30 million per 1,000 persons relocated as the broad metric. So let's say £30,000 per person as a benefit. Now, obviously, the aim is to improve the local areas wherever the government departments are moving to, and for all of the points that obviously Mark and Beth have already raised. But that is also about creating new employment opportunities. It's not just moving people from London to elsewhere around the UK. And I think from the previous talk, anyone that was in on that, and I caught the end of it, you've got to consider the diversity that creates, the geographical diversity, as well as diversity that we're all used to and beginning and hopefully developing in our general workforces, but actually getting the benefit of people with different backgrounds, different experience from that geographical perspective, I think is a real positive. And so that associated benefit, the spending in the economy that creates, and indeed the sense of community that Beth was just referring to, I think are all extremely valid. But I think perhaps a little odd from a property professional point of view, I would question, do you need a building? So let's just throw that out there for a moment. I mean, certainly it is true to say that a building in the traditional sense can create an anchor. It creates an opportunity for growth. It creates perhaps the rejuvenation of a city centre. It attracts other employers historically. But we've gone through a very radical period of change as a result of COVID, etc. And so you've got to consider whether the cost of new buildings, the cost of staff relocation, what is the net benefit that creates? And could a greater benefit be achieved if we did things just slightly differently? And this is all part of the work that I know that Mark and his team do to come up with these solutions and these outcomes. But obviously recruiting outside of London rather than just relocation has got to be a significant part of that. And I think you do also need to recognise that there is an importance for links with the MPs that the various departments work with, ambassadors, which I'm sure you'll be coming on to in a moment, Corinne. So we can't remove every facet out from London, because that is where the seat of our government sits. That's where the MPs are that we've elected, and obviously the civil service is there to support. So the benefit we need to consider, but also the need for physical presence, the need for attendance. I mean, I think, post-COVID, we're all aware that there is a much more flexible working environment across the civil service and certainly across the private sector. And there are real benefits to be gained from that. Obviously, the remote and hybrid working needs to feature in any of these new plans. We cannot go back to and assume that the pre-COVID world is going to be sustainable going forwards, because actually people do enjoy the work-life balance. And we all benefit from the technology which we use on a daily basis now that probably a lot of us didn't use at all prior to COVID. So building that in and making sure that any of these solutions work flexibly has got to be at the heart of this. There's obviously we're talking about the campus approach in Darlington and is applying elsewhere around the UK. I wonder whether there's the ability to take that a step further. I mean, creating hubs in these locations, creating the co-location of departments in a close geographical area is clearly beneficial, both to the departments themselves, but also the wider local authorities and communities that they serve. And the concept of having what we are terming generally, it's coming up with having purposeful days, making sure that when the teams are together, it derives real value and real benefit. It's not just attending the office for the sake of attending the office. There is value for building up the culture of the department. There is value of building up the links with the community. But equally, from a wider carbon footprint perspective, wider cost perspective, there is also value in allowing people to have the flexible working and having the benefit of a more hybrid approach. So I guess I would consider, do we go a step further? Do we generate the concept of government WeWork type hubs, where it's actually not a building that is specifically relating to, the Treasury. It's not specifically relating to any other government department, but it's actually a common collective hub where any public sector body could join together and collaborate and work on a flexible basis to generate those purposeful days. Now, this is an initiative that I know the GPA is progressing. I think there's some fairly recent commentary on that. But you've got to say, actually, if there was a civil service biased hub that you could go to because you needed the space from home, you get away from home distractions, or to have the benefit of actually working with colleagues, but not having the burden of maintaining and looking after that premises for your own sake, where it may not be fully utilised. Maybe that's a way forward. And I would just conclude with perhaps just a couple of other questions. What happens to the residual property? The net effect of this policy, of this approach, has got to be considered. What is the net effect of actually withdrawing what have been large institutional presence in central London? And what does that do? A lot of the buildings perhaps are in poor condition, perhaps have been under-maintained. They generally will be older buildings. Quite a lot of them are listed buildings. And a lot of them may not have the energy performance that we would be looking to in the future. So there is a legacy issue that has to be considered. And overall, coming back to the property perspective, you have got to look at the whole life cost, the whole life carbon cost, the whole life financial cost, but also the whole life benefit to the communities that the government serves. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dean. And there are so many little nuggets within that, and so many questions for all of you as well. But I'm going to hand over to Corinne, because I'm aware of our ticking clock down here, and ask you, Corinne, from the FCDO perspective, to talk a little bit more about the scale of the challenge that you have with staff spread all across the world and a second HQ in Scotland.
Yeah, so I suppose we're a rather unusual department in a way, because we are a global organisation of 17,000 people. We've got about 8,000 UK-based civil servants, but about 3,000 of those are permanent, are sort of always overseas at any one time. So we're in 282 locations, about 180 odd countries around the world. In the UK, we've got three presences. We've got 2 joint headquarters, one in London and one in East Kilbride, outside Glasgow. We've also got one in Milton Keynes, Hanslope Park, but our 2 headquarters are in Scotland and in King Charles Street in London. And we had our target, we've got our target 1,500 people up in Scotland now by 2027. But we looked at this back in May last year as an executive committee and concluded that we weren't even close to being on track to meeting our target. We'd taken at that point quite an organic approach, sort of advertising all our roles in the UK, but in both locations, hoping that would sort of enable people to be able to move and sort of, and we were recruiting people into Scotland. It wasn't delivering for us, so we decided we needed a different tack. I think some of the challenges actually at the time we concluded were partly sort of political expectations, to be fair, about people being physically in London. Partly, I think, a little bit what you mentioned, that all the foreign embassies are based in London and not a lot of the work is there. Partly security. A lot of our work has to be done at a high classification, and the building in London is better equipped for that. We didn't yet have a building that was properly equipped for that in Scotland. And also, actually, competitive salaries in Scotland. We were losing people to the Scottish Government and other organisations. So those were some of our challenges. So we changed tack, and it's basically 3-pronged approach now. First is location, location, location. So we've taken the opportunity of HMRC being interested in moving into our current property in East Kilbride to make a decision to move into central Glasgow. So that decision to shift location is partly opportunistic, but also taking that opportunity to actually move in central Glasgow, where we know we can recruit from a wider talent pool. We're going to have an office which is sort of modern, sustainable, accessible, a good place to work. It's going to be, part of the central Glasgow government hub and part of this UK government presence. So we want to be part of that community. We're going to build a bigger high classification area so we can enable those kinds of jobs to be up there. So that's kind of the pitch. And the message has been around being able to create a whole of career offer. Rightly or wrongly, through the organic approach, we weren't attracting all kinds of FCDO jobs up to Scotland, partly because of those limitations. And this is something which is going to enable us to say you can do your whole career in Scotland, working on national security issues, working on whatever it may be, or you can move between the two. So location was one. Second was organisation. We needed to do something structurally a bit different because we weren't delivering the change we needed. So what we're doing now, rather than just going for the organic approach, we're identifying what are the roles that we're actually going to move up. And we decided we needed to be more deliberate, saying, right, we're going to, across the whole of the FCDO, across the whole of the career offer, what are the teams, what are the roles that we're actually going to move, because we think we need to do that in order to make the change. We've set ourselves a target of 70 SCS, which is 50% of our SCS, which I don't think all government departments have done, and that's quite a big shift for us, but we've kind of committed to that. And so that's kind of the big organisational change. And then the third bit is sort of the hearts and minds bit, actually. It's the people story, the people side of it. Partly that is around telling the story, the vision for why we want to be committed to Scotland and to Glasgow, because we want to be more diverse as an organisation. There's a fantastic talent pool. It's a great place to live. We can be alongside our government community, and you can have a whole of career offer. So partly it's the vision for why investing more in Scotland. Secondly, I think there's been a targeted engagement with people currently working in our location in East Kilbride, because for many of them who've been there for decades potentially, it's a big shift, and it goes back to this point about identity. Actually, how do you, and people have set up their lives and have kids in school there, so actually how do you support people who have established themselves in that area? It's not that far, but for many people it can feel like a big shift. So we've got a sort of transition and support program around people that currently work there. One of the surprising, well, perhaps not surprising, one of the challenges around London, I think you touched on this, because again, there's a big, be an impact on our staff whose careers have been until now largely London-based when they're back in the UK, because actually many of the roles will move up, so there'll be fewer roles available for people in London. And actually we're still working that through, because there's an identity thing there actually for people who have traditionally been London-based. So how do we make sure they're thinking about their roles and thinking about their career in a slightly different way? And then one of the most exciting bits so far has been actually tapping into people, the 3,000 who are posted at any one time overseas, and actually talking to people out in our network as they're thinking about what they might do when they come back from their overseas posting, and if they've always been London-based, saying, hey, have you thought about, rather than coming back to London, come back to Scotland, come and do it, as a posting for 4 years before you go abroad again, or come and do it and establish yourself for the long term. And that's been we've already sort of, got quite a few people signed up. They might not be coming back for a year or two, but when they come back, they'll come back to London. And so we're not there yet. We're at the beginning of this journey, but I think that's our three-pronged approach. I think some of the challenges are around this identity piece, both for our staff who are currently in Abercrombie House. I think particularly for us, we're a relatively new organisation, having merged FCO and DFID, and the building in East Kilbride has strong associations with DFID, and so for many staff who perhaps didn't agree with the merger or felt, actually this was the part of sort of their DFID identity, this is sort of something which is being taken away. So we have to handle that in a very sensitive way, but also sort of selling the positive vision about why the change and why that's good for all of our staff. And also we've set the target as a quantitative figure, but we know our workforce has to shrink because of headcount reductions and because of budget reductions. So it does mean as a proportion of our whole organisation that 1,500 is even a bigger challenge, but we're up for it. So invite us back next year and see how we're doing against the new target.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Corinne. I'm going to open up to the floor for questions. Does anyone have a question? We've got one here at the front, and then a lady in a green shirt over there. Sorry, I'm going to make the microphone runners run.
Hi all, I am Mumbai. I work in DEFRA in the property team actually, so this is quite interesting for me. My question is around pay. So in terms of the relocation strategy, I envision, because sometimes pay, the London pay and the nationwide pay are completely different, and I can envision that being a demotivation for some people. So what's your approach to ensure that people are more motivated to move away, even though it might mean a reduction in their pay?
Corinne, did you want to go? Yeah.
It's something we've been thinking a lot about. So for us, and others might have different. So we've got a relocation package, which partly helps people to make that move and to perhaps lose the London allowance in the short term. I think part of our story then is around cost of living more generally, depending on where you're moving to and where your government office is, there are real benefits. So in our case, for instance, if you base yourself in Scotland and are there for more than 3 years, then, your kids get free university education, you don't have to pay for the dentist, and there's various kind of things which make your cost of living more attractive. But then you sort of have to weigh that up against, losing your London allowance if that's the case. But we're working that through, and I think it's different for lots of different individuals, and we have to I think we just got to support staff in calculating what it means for them. But I think for many staff, actually understanding the real benefits and the cost of living attraction of moving out of London is quite significant.
Yeah.
Sure. Just practically, a lot of the 16,000 people are not people, they're roles, in the sense that when someone leaves a role in London, if that role is then advertised in Darlington or in Sheffield or in Glasgow, then that person coming in new potentially is coming in and accepts a package or whatever else. So notwithstanding, another reason why relocation is the wrong title, in that the role is being relocated, but very often the person isn't. And I should know, and I don't know whether you know, but what proportion of those 16,000 roles actually are associated with a person relocated?
Yeah, I don't know, but I think it's quite small. I mean, if you look at what's happened in the Treasury in Darlington, for example, about 85% of the roles have been filled by people directly recruited from the Northeast, and there's about 15% of us, which I think is something like 35 or so of us who have moved from London. So that is an important, and I should say that I think it was I think it's really important to also get some people to relocate, because you're also trying to develop locations where there is some civil service experience, but also a big part of this is bringing people in who've never worked in the civil service before. So I think you need to have a mix of both of those.
And congratulations for working in the most glamorous function and profession in government.
Thank you. We had a question over there. Did the microphone make it?
Hello, thank you all. Sarah Mossman, I'm in Building Digital UK, part of DSET. I agree, we definitely need to make sure that we're really transparent on the proportion of roles that are actually generated locally and not relocated from London, because otherwise it's quite London-centric growth strategy. And I guess I've just got a question in respect of affordability and accessibility for locals, of the unintended consequences of this growth strategy. Are we going to be recording that? I guess I'm based in Manchester, and Manchester's, growing excessively, and we still don't have enough housing for the demand of that city, even though we've got the most housing being built, I think, across the country. So it's kind of, I'm just curious if anyone's looking into that, and as someone mentioned, the net impact of this strategy. So thank you.
So I think we're going to paraphrase it slightly, if that's all right. I think we're looking at how are we looking at the impact we're having on local communities and communities in the regions that we're growing the civil service presence. I don't know, Mark or Dean, both of you sort of touch on it.
Let me start. So hopefully, if you look across the UK and the places for growth locations, and forgive me, I can't see where you are, so I don't know whether I'm looking in the right direction or not. But if you look across the places for growth locations, there are elements which are consistent in that the locations are largely close to existing strong transport infrastructure links. They are identified as part of a good core set of skills in that location which are relevant to the government hub or to the department or whatever. So there's not a scattergun approach, and one of the things that is really difficult is how wide and broad do we go to try and get levelling up across the whole of the UK. If you look at Manchester in particular, the theme and we haven't talked much about thematic campuses, but we can if you want to. The theme in Manchester is digital because of the work that's coming out of the universities, because of the core set of skills and what that region is known for. I think you're right. We should ensure that actually the infrastructure behind that is there, or that we can create the infrastructure, whether that's housing or anything else. But my gut feel, and without any evidence to prove it, my gut feel is that actually there is a bit of build it and they will come, or the build it and the investment will follow, because with new jobs new money, new real estate, and let's face it, there isn't really anything else that government can invest in a location other than jobs, real estate, and money, then the other things will follow, and those sustainability criteria for the communities will evolve over time.
Thank you, Mark. Love a Field of Dreams reference, but yeah, Dean, please.
Really, just to build on Mark's comments there, I mean, I think we have to consider that the Places for Growth initiative and policy is actually to create the catalyst for all of those things. So, in real terms, yes, the infrastructure needs to grow and needs to build as the wider benefits of the Places for Growth initiative is felt locally. But in practice, the individual numbers of people that are and individual jobs that are being created in a particular location are in themselves not necessarily that significant, but the wider impact is where it comes, and that's where, candidly, the private sector, the wider market, is interested, because that's where they want to see where they can then invest to build the extra housing and community facilities and everything that's required. So it does feel a little bit chicken and egg, and you're quite right. It would be nice to say, well, actually, all that investment will go first. But with the limited funds that obviously are available, this is to be the catalyst rather than creating a whole new town.
Fantastic. Thank you. Any more questions? We've got someone at the back there, and then if you want to keep your hands up, we might be able to bring a microphone over to this side, please. But do you want to go first?
Hi, I'm Claire Harrison, and SCS2. I've worked across a couple of different civil service organisations, and each one of them have a different approach to Places for Growth. Is it mandated, and what happens if a particular organisation doesn't reach the targets that we're aiming for? Because I see a lot of resistance in some areas, and it's very frustrating, just because I'm biased, because I live in Leeds.
I'm happy to. So, I'm not sure there's a sort of, you get your budget docked or something like that. But I mean, I think that there is rightly a lot of pressure, including from, Simon Case, Alex Chisholm, now Cat Little, that departments are moving towards their targets, and actually a lot of ministerial pressure. I mean, I think one of the things that's important is this isn't just a ministerial initiative. Actually, it's something that the top of the civil service really kind of supports. But I totally recognise your point, and it's one of the things I get frustrated about too, because I do think that there is still quite a lot of scepticism about the sorts of jobs that have to be based in London. I mean, my job, I'm in charge of the budget, right? I speak to the Chancellor pretty much every single day. I do not have to be based in London. I can do that job perfectly well from Darlington. I do. I'm in London today, but it's quite unusual. I think this is my second or third time I've been in London since the beginning of the year. I come down every 3 or 4 weeks. So, and I am quite militant on this. I think if I can do my job from Darlington, I can't see many other jobs that can't be done from outside of London. But you are right, I think there's still a long way to go. People still have this sort of, if your stakeholders are in London, you have to be based there. And it's kind of like, well, there is IT and, other technology that means you don't have to be. So I think we've got to be realistic that I think, probably even amongst the permanent secretary cadre, there is not, complete, buy-in to doing this. But it's part of my job, our job, to say, well, it's, this is the right thing to do, and it is perfectly possible to do, and in fact, is a benefit. For the Treasury, actually, my colleagues, James Boller as the permanent secretary, is totally committed to this, and I think everybody thinks it's making the Treasury a better place to work and better at doing what we're doing, which is like advising on really important things that affect everybody in the country. But I agree, we've got some way to go still to get everybody on board.
It's maybe a question for fellow panel members, really, but going back to your, if you build it, they will come type approach. Is there actually scope to say, well, create buildings, create the hubs that then the departments can use, rather than waiting for it to be departmentally led?
So the WeWork model is really interesting, and my colleagues in the Government Property Agency, who are responsible for the delivery of offices, looking at it as you mentioned. Personally, I think Just as a side story, I live in Nottingham, and I work out of a couple of places in Nottingham. I work out of a GPA old building which is about to be closed, I'm delighted to say, and I work out of an HMRC brand new spangly part of the hub's development. It is the closest I have ever got, and it's not something that I will ever say, but when I couldn't get into the HMRC hub, I very nearly said, "Do you know who I am?" And I resisted the temptation, I'm delighted to say, and that had to go all the way up to the estates director, property director in HMRC to allow me to have a desk in an HMRC hub 4 miles from where I live in Nottingham. And that's not right, and we're trying to do something about that. But the thing is how you break into that problem. So is government ever going to be able to afford to build it, and they will come in Loughborough, in Sunderland, and don't take any of these as rubbish places, quite the opposite, they're all brilliant places. So can we just go and scattergun? No, of course we can't. So what we've got to find is the sweet spot between building centres of gravity, like in Glasgow, like in Darlington, like in Birmingham, where I'm officially based, like in London, because London will continue to be a centre of gravity for the civil service, but also give people the maximum flexibility, everything to what you said, Dean. What real estate is, ultimately, is a unit of production, and what we want is the real estate to be enabling the most productive civil service that we possibly can. So, yeah, I haven't answered the question at all, but it's sort of somewhere in there, that's the battle that we're trying to continually turn the handle on.
And there I was thinking that I'd be able to move home. Loughborough is a great place. Thank you, Mark.
It is a great place.
There was a question from over here. I don't know whether you got the microphone in the end. Do you know, hand back up. Thank you.
Hi there. John Carter from Ministry of Defence, leading on redevelopment of Clyde over the coming decades. I think I've got a kind of couple of pronged question, which is that for recruitment up at Clyde and in west of Scotland, we have kind of systematically seen, I think, kind of real challenges in terms of being able to attract candidates with the restrictions we have on pay bands and being able to bring those in, bring in the people at the quality we want for the rates that we're able to offer. So I think there's a challenge that we're facing there that we're looking to address. But then also there's also recognition that given the scale of the work we've got coming over the forthcoming decades, even if we could improve that package, there's going to be a shortage of skills in the area that's going to allow us to get on with the level of work that we need to. And so I just wanted to sort of kind of first of all understand to what extent the kind of recruitment in the hubs, the sort of proportion of recruitment success versus lack of success when roles are advertised, and whether there's a kind of any trends in that in terms of whether that is improving or not. But then also a potential solution we're looking at for that skill shortage is use of potentially regional hubs that might then mean we can cast our net a bit further in terms of being able to find those skills. So first question around levels of recruitment success in the regional hubs, and then second question around any evidence of exhausting local skills and then having to build those up locally over a more prolonged period of time.
Yeah, go on, Beth.
That's a great question. And from a Darlington perspective, so we've had great success in recruiting. I think one of the things that goes to where your hubs are and your kind of travel to work distance. So, you know, I mean, there were quite a lot of commentary actually when the Treasury was in Darlington, it's too small, whatever. I mean, we're not just recruiting people from Darlington, you know, we've got people coming from, you know, north of Newcastle, down York, Leeds, and so on. So I think the transport facilities in an area, in the kind of travel to work area, is really, really important. And I think, you know, I don't think we would have had so much success recruiting if we haven't got that really wide travel to work area. Below SCS pay hasn't particularly been an issue, or, you know, I mean, it's an issue for the civil service generally, obviously, but it hasn't been a particular issue. I think some of our more sort of technical jobs more difficult to recruit for, but we're not having lots and lots of sort of failed recruitments. I think senior jobs, it is much harder to get people to come in at senior levels, and that's where we've still got, I think, quite a bit of work to do. We've got some examples of that, people coming from local authorities and so on. But I mean, going to your point, I mean, I see this in Darlington, for example. It's like a decade-long program. You know, we're starting to talk to people in local schools. We're part of the discussion about the regional skills plans. How can we work with FE colleges, with all the local universities to think over time? So I think it is still a work in progress in Darlington, but generally we've recruited some fantastic people.
Brilliant.
It's something that we're thinking hard about as well, and one of the reasons I said that we're moving from East Kilbride to Central Glasgow is because we know there will be a broader and bigger talent pool. It'll be easier for people to commute from a bigger area, because that skills shortage is something very much in our minds as well. And I think what we're going to be doing, as well as more targeted recruitment strategies through using the universities that are based there, sort of more outreach, like you talked about, to schools, but also to universities and colleges, to try and attract and sort of sell the roles that we've got to offer. And I think doing that as a UK government sort of hub or campus, I think makes us even more powerful. So I think there's real opportunity there. But no, I can see it's interesting that you're facing that challenge in Clyde.
Thank you. I'm afraid that we are down to our last 30 seconds of the session, so I'm going to wrap it there. I'm sure you'll agree our panel were fantastic. Thank you all so much. Sort of top 3 nuggets that I took away from this was that it's not about relocation, it's about locating roles in local communities so that we can deliver better and more efficient public services. It's around creating community and belonging, both within the civil service and colleagues working across departments, but also in those communities. And it's really about having purposeful days, I really like that term, Dean, of bringing people together and bringing that diversity of thought into the work that we do and the policies that we create.